The official Vintage Guitar Magazine Price Guide has partnered with 33 of the top guitar dealers in the industry to provide the most accurate values for thousands of models. This includes electric guitars, acoustic guitars, basses, amplifiers, effects, mandolins, and banjos. Whether your instrument is an investment or simply a piece you enjoy playing, it's always helpful to know what it's worth. If you're checking out a guitar at your local shop and want to know its value before making the purchase, this guide is your go-to source for all the details. Available in both print and digital editions, you can have the guide right at your fingertips no matter where you go.
Hello and welcome to Buy That Guitar, presented by Vintage Guitar Magazine. I'm your host, Ram Tuli. This podcast is about the joy of guitar. That includes buying guitars, selling guitars, collecting guitars. We're talking vintage guitars, new guitars, used guitars, pre-war, flat tops, electric Spanish arch tops, custom shop guitars, limited edition guitars, basses, amps, effect pedals, lap steels, mandolins, banjo. If it has strings, we're going to talk about it. I spent most of my life studying the vintage guitar market. It's truly something I love and I'm passionate about. I can talk guitars all day, and I'm going to. Hello, everybody. Welcome to another thrilling and exciting edition of Buy That Guitar. Today, I'm joined with Timm Kummer. Tim is a legendary figure in the world of vintage guitars, often described as the guitar archaeologist due to his decades-long passion for unearthing, restoring, and dealing in rare investment-grade instruments. Over 45 years in the industry, he's built a reputation as an expert appraiser, collector, dealer, specializing in true vintage pieces, primarily pre-war acoustics and resonators from the 1930s, along with solidbody electrics up to about 1965. How are you, Tim?
I'm well. How are you?
Good. Thank you for hanging out with me today. You know, we've been friends. We've actually been talking for years, long before I was doing the guide. You used to help me with my books. I remember I learned quite a bit about vintage guitars from you, but mostly about the vintage guitar business in general. You know, I remember we used to talk years ago when I was doing the books about buy that vintage guitar and all that. And you always laid it out. Mm-hmm. You always told me the truth about everything. So
well, I kind of have a respect for the business, and when it's having issues, it's best to talk about it rather than try and ignore the signals.
Yeah, and you know, whenever something weird's going on in the market, I call you to get your opinion. Yep. There's a lot of guys I call.
Yep.
And wouldn't you say today's market is a bit strange?
Yes. Well, strange, soft. I would say unpredictable, but I think it's actually very predictable. I think that pricing has to line up with values, and we're just not seeing that just yet.
Right. Do you think we're as extended as we were in the early 2000s, or do you think we were just undervalued and now we're kind of catching up to where we're supposed to be?
Well, that last bubble, I think you're referring to, you know, Les Paul Juniors went from being $4,500 guitars to over $10,000, as I recall. And that was not sustainable, as I told anyone who would listen. And we have the same thing going on now. Now it's not a mortgage crisis that's going to break this bubble. There are other factors, I believe. But yeah, we have an adjustment coming. It's kind of long overdue at this point.
Right.
You have a lot of amateur dealers on Reverb. They're men and women with other jobs, and their hobby is guitars. And I have no problem with that, but they don't necessarily they don't have an idea of how it really works. And so, you know, they go out and they look at Reverb or eBay. In the past, eBay was more trouble than Reverb because Reverb didn't exist. Mm-hmm. But they tend to believe what they see on there and don't understand asking versus result pricing.
Right. And one of the things we've learned is that, you know, buying habits change. People always...
Oh, absolutely.
And people will always want vintage guitars. So there is always a market for vintage guitars. But the only thing is that our buying habits change. And right now is, I think, a time where that's happening, where, you know, good stuff is staying tight, but the fodder, you know, the stuff on the loose end, you're not getting $12,000 for a Les Paul Jr. now. It's just not going to happen because that's not what it was supposed to be.
No, well, and those are, you know, it's more, things trend in the business, always have. A couple of years ago, an ES345, a PAF ES345 was circling in the $15,000 to $17,000 range. And I told anyone who asked, that's a good buy. That's undervalued. And now you look at them, they're up in the high 20s into the low 30s. Well, that's too much growth. You know, that's a little bit too much enthusiasm. But I guess the vacuum created by a dot neck at $80,000 or some crazy number I saw recently creates the idea that the 45 should be worth.
And the 55s too. People ask much more.
Well, the 55s are kind of their own thing, and because of the ebony board, and so few of them were made with stop tailpieces, they're kind of a different category. You find one with a stop tailpiece and a mono stop tailpiece, they're more money than I think than a dot neck.
Yeah,
but they
so one of the things,
purpose.
There's like 3 things I really want to talk to you about. One, I think we'll get into in depth about the market, but one of the things is your expertise and your history. But I want to go back to the very beginning. When we think of Timm Kummer, we always think of Guitar Trader. Is that where you got your start?
Actually, I worked in small music stores in the town that I grew up in Toms River. So I probably, but I was dealing guitars in high school, even when I wasn't working in a music store. But of course, working in a music store gave me access to guitar players, and most music store owners didn't really want to buy and sell used guitars. They couldn't predict the availability, and so they could order Guilds and Gibsons, Fenders and Martins. So they liked that business model better than the classifieds or bulletin boards down to supermarket. So that was kind of where my foundation came from.
So you're like most of us. You started out hunting through bargains and classified ads, getting hands-on experience as you build knowledge, right?
Right. Well, Guitar Trader, there was no better university of vintage guitars than that shop. Every day, UPS 5 days a week, every day a UPS truck would pull up and drop 15 guitars off on us. The front door would bring in another half dozen to a dozen. That was every day, 5 days a week for years. It was an amazing amount of instruments. There was, of course, Norm was out in California, of course, George, Mandolin Brothers, but that was really sort of it. There were small regional guys who I always counted on to pick, but, we were kind of, in electrics, it was us and Norm.
Dave DeForest, was he there? You started working for him, right?
Yeah, yep. Well, I first was picking for him. I was out there finding things and doing my regular job. And so eventually I figured I had to learn a lot more to really do it right. So I took a job packing boxes there, which it was an interesting education. But it gave me access to so many. I could take guitars apart all day long.
We will talk about Guitar Trader. They always talk about the periodic mail order books you guys put out. Those are collector's items. People, I see them on eBay. I see them. People are buying and selling the Guitar Trader pamphlets, the old picture books, the descriptions.
Yeah, I was actually I had to put them together every month. Dave, at first it was Dave and I doing them, but then Dave decided he wanted to live on his boat down in the Caribbean. So he took off, and I was left there with the job of putting them together. Meant photographing, writing articles, changing inventory. But I think we were the only people who actually sold our inventory list.
Right.
People paid for it. Now, if you bought a guitar, it came free to you. And we would send out free ones every quarter. But, the monthly was, it was a subscription.
Yeah, because people talk about, Grunes was famous for their brochures, and you guys were famous. That was kind of like before we had Reverb, before we had eBay. That's how you found out what was what and where it was and how much it was going for, Now, one of the biggest claims to fame is when you think of Guitar Trader, it was really the reissue Les Pauls that I think you were instrumental in putting together. Is that correct?
Well, yeah. Well, since I was, the main salesman there, when the standard 80s came out, well, even before that, Gibson sent a guy out to do some R&D on 59 Les Pauls, and he was there for 3 days measuring. We had, 15 or so sunbursts at the time. He measured all these things. He went back to Kalamazoo and he made the KM model, which as we all know, is quite wrong. Maple neck, three-piece maple neck with a volute the size of Texas, no dish to the top. It was just really, really wrong. Then they came out with Standard 80, which, again, the body was shortened. I'm not quite sure why they cut a quarter inch off the back of it, lengthwise. Probably because it rested on your leg. It balanced better on your leg that way. But all the guys who were buying them from me, and there were a lot,
right,
were complaining that these small little details weren't right. And so we had Gibson's ear, and we said, look, these are the specs. We really wanted to have the long neck tenon, but we couldn't get them to do that at the time. Wouldn't be until, I guess the early 90s when they started making them that way. But, the Open B, Open O logo,
so they were really far off, weren't they? Like the 70s, like that. And you wondered, like, why? How did something go? Where you basically have the tooling, you have the templates. How did it get so? I guess because they didn't make them for so long, and then when they started remaking them again in 68, 69, did they just not have the tooling anymore? Did they just get rid of all the templates?
I assume that the bean counters at Norland decided that it was cheaper to do them the way they were doing them. Now, the first, like the three-piece neck, which comes in 69, their excuse was, well, it's because the headstock breaks. And, it's stronger. They changed the pitch of the headstock, angle, because they thought it'd be, less prone to breaking. I've been around guitars for a long time. I've never seen a Les Paul or any other guitar other than a Firebird. I've never seen one neck break for any other reason than mishandling. Look, I've dealt with rock stars for years. They throw guitars around, especially back in the 70s. They threw them around like didn't matter. So headstocks got broken. But, for the most part, the headstock is not a weak point, although they addressed it as such. The dish on the top, I'm not quite sure why they decided that wasn't worth doing. Certainly a three-piece maple top was not the most attractive way to make a guitar. But, the customer, this is true of this business, the customer is always the best barometer. They're the ones who are going to ask for things because the manufacturers don't get it. They'll only respond after a lot of pressure.
Right. But it seems like the Norland guys did finally get it, right? I think we go back to like 1978. Everybody knows, like when you think of the Les Paul of the 70s, the pancake bodies, extremely heavy, the maple necks, they just weren't there, right? They just weren't, for people that were looking for that 59 Les Paul feel, play, that wasn't anywhere near. So I think the first attempt was the Strings and Things, right? Those guys down in Memphis, they get 20 guitars made, but they miss, don't they? They don't come close with those.
I tried ordering one from them. I was a kid, a teenager, and I called out there, which at the time it cost money.
Right.
To make a phone call. These days with cell phones, it's a monthly charge whether you use it or not. Anyway, they wouldn't guarantee a two-piece top. They weren't making necessarily a one-piece neck. I know they got some of them right. I have a friend who has one. Some of the very later ones, when you get down towards, the Flame Top reissue, the Leo and the Jimmy Wallace stuff, their Strings and Things has kind of got it more right.
Right.
But when they were doing it originally, it wasn't, the features weren't quite there.
Yeah. In fact, a lot of the complaints were they couldn't even cut the bout right, which you would wonder, like, why couldn't you just trace it? Just trace out an old 59 Les Paul.
Well, you would think that, wouldn't you?
Yeah. Well, so Strings of Things, they were pretty, that kind of gets the ball rolling. Leo's in Oakland, he gets about, I don't know, like 100 made that are, I think those are up there. I know the Jimmy Wallace ones are really sought after because there you get the colors and the tops start really coming. But you guys, I think, you guys come in and you orchestrate the Guitar Trader 82 batch with Dave DeForest and you guys. Did you go down there and actually hand-pick the quarter sawn tops?
Yeah.
You actually physically went down there and said, I want this top. You just X'd them out. I want this.
Yeah, looked at them in the raw and picked them that way. And we actually photographed all of them and showed them to the potential customers. Person could pick their top in the raw. So, it was a bit of a process. they were $14.95, you know,
right.
at a time when a standard 80 was about half of that.
Right.
You know, I think $7.95 or something we were selling them for.
How much was an actual 59 Les Paul at that time?
You could find one for 6,000.
Okay.
But the good ones were 8 and 10. You know,
so this was
we
worth
probably
it.
had
this was
20 of them at the time.
Yeah. Now you guys, so you do the hand, but you also do the finish properly, right? You guys do the dark cherry, more of a dark burst.
We had a 59 that had the absolute, we thought, perfect color. So we had them imitate that. It was kind of an iced tea burst, but more red than brown, but not cherry.
Right. And so now what's unique about these that you did, the first 15 to 20, they got actual PAFs, right?
Yes, yes, they did. I soldered them in myself.
And where did you get the PAFs?
Well, that's another funny story. In the late 70s, it was quite popular. There's this little guitar player running around, may he rest in peace. Rick Derringer made DiMarzio pickups super popular. And he played a 355, and he had DiMarzios in it. And we had customers coming in requesting DiMarzios. They'd buy a pair of DiMarzios for about $70, and they'd have us install them in their guitars, mostly 345s and 55s, ironically. And we would keep the pickups for the install. And so they didn't have to pay for an install, but we got the pickups. We had probably 100 pair of, and that's pair, not 100 pickups,
right,
100 pair of PAF pickups. And so, you know, they weren't super valuable the way they are today.
Right.
I think at the time, maybe they were $300 a piece. You know, now it's crazy, but you know, that was different.
Yeah, I think now you're paying $5,000. You know, in fact, you could buy, you know, I don't know, like a couple of years ago, you could buy 350s, just for cheaper than the PAFs themselves, and just pull them out.
Well, I mean, if someone didn't harvest them already.
Yeah. Yeah, that was the thing, is that there was a lot of harvesting. So you guys got these PAFs, and then for some reason, I remember reading somewhere that you wanted it to be so much like the 59 that you actually had to saw off the second ring on the Klusen tuners.
Yep, I did that too, because they had no resource for a single ring.
Crazy.
The pickup rings, they also didn't have the proper size. Went to Larry DiMarzio. Larry was making proper sized pickup rings, so we put those on. We didn't bother with the knobs. No one was making a good enough one, and it wasn't really worth it to put original knobs on them. We had Michael Dresner, who was our repair guy, head of our repair department. He made truss rod covers in that, you know, that looked very, very good. I mean, much better than whatever anyone was doing at the time. They didn't have the, you know, the rolled lines in them like some people do these days, but it was, you know, they were aesthetically, they looked more right.
The one thing about today, if you could get a hold of one of these original with the PAFs, those are pricey, aren't they?
Yeah, I guess the PAFs would be probably $7,000 on their own for two PAFs. So the fact that people ask in the high teens into the low 20s, you know, do they get it? I don't know. But I've appraised guitars, or at least vetted them for people who were buying them from other dealers, to be sure that what they were getting was what they were told they were getting.
Yeah, last year, because you know those are hard for me to price in the price guide, only because the data is so scarce. So last year, Jimmy Wallace came up to me and said, you know, he goes, you know, you're having trouble finding data, and I'm like, yeah. So he helped me actually find some sales of what these these prehistorics were really going for, especially in Japan, and they were going for well over $10,000. I think I had them in the book for $3,000 or something, kind of like where something from the the KMs were, you know. And he's like, no. So he was showing me like, and so I know that like the stringing things, the original ones, those go for north of 20. The ones that you guys made at Guitar Trader, well of 10 to 15. You know, if you can find the sale, a lot of times it's hard. You know, people they don't tell you that they're selling and buying it. You know, but those are collectors. Those are big time collector pieces now to get those original prehistoric dealer orders.
Well, I'll tell you this, just as a footnote. I probably get 3 or 4 requests a quarter for guys to verify them, and probably three-quarters of them aren't right. They're not original. And the dealer trying to sell it to the guy is, swearing up and down that it's a Guitar Trader reissue when it's not. I'll also circle back and say any prehistoric that's selling north of $10,000 is going to have a top, like an unbelievable top. I know because I get requests for the crazy top ones, and guys are willing to pay whatever. Right. But there's an awful lot of them sitting around doing very little,
Yeah. So it's kind of interesting that, because then after the success of these things, Gibson actually gets into the historic reissues.
Right.
I think about my very first Les Paul was the 30th anniversary, which was I think they kind of claim that was the first true kind of their reissue because they built it in Kalamazoo using the same people, the same tooling, the same machine, the same whatever, and with the Tim Shaws in them. I love that thing. I still have that guitar, but I know that by 1993, they start putting figured maple tops. They stop, they actually have the custom shop stuff starts, the VOS stuff starts, medium C necks and the, trying to get that old vibe back, but that's a real, then I guess in 2000s, they come up with the true historics where they start using the hide glue, the double carved tops, the vintage dishes, they match the plastics, really nice stuff. They start doing the thing. And those are going for, and then I guess Murphy, the whole Murphy lab stuff now, $6,000 to $10,000 people are paying now for these R9s.
They're paying more than that.
Yeah.
Some of them.
Yeah, if they're Brazilian.
The Wildwood or some of these specialty dealers who can get Gibson to put Brazilian boards on them. They're over. Dave's out in La Crosse. He does a really good business in R9s because he hand selects wood and he knows what the customers want.
Right. So it's out there. There's a lot of good stuff out there. And sometimes, like I think you suggest if you want something, you go to a dealer you trust.
Well, yeah. No, that's paramount.
Yeah.
You must only deal with people who the door or their phone gets answered, when you want them.
Yeah.
There's far too many pirates out there, and caveat emptor. That's all I can
when
say.
we first started talking way back, I remember when I was doing one of my books, you were kind of explaining to me the difference between G-bass and reverb.
Yes. Well, I think that my take on the two, I use G-bass, and G-bass kind of has a standard for their dealers. But reverb, you can be, one guy with one guitar and post it on there. Now, I know that they put sort of guidelines on so that there's safety for the customer, for the buyer. And I've heard some horror stories, but they seem to get straightened out. Reverb, I guess, tends to, side with the buyer. And that's a good, I have no problem with that. I've always given a money-back guarantee to anyone who bought from me. I don't need to have someone tell me that I have to do that. But, it's just that someone who has one or two instruments doesn't necessarily isn't even looking at the long term. Maybe his only sale, so he doesn't. He's not all that easy to get a refund from.
And G-Bass, I think you told me that you have to have a minimum number of items for sale to be even considered a dealer.
Right.
That would be, and usually the G-Bass dealers are well known. They have brick and mortar stores. They have a presence on the internet that everybody, you can, like you say, you could pick up the phone and call somebody and get that person,
Right.
And that's kind of, and I think, we always say, when you buy this stuff online, let your American Express card be your lawyer.
Well, that too.
Yeah.
I guess that, look, I stopped using PayPal for my own reasons. One of which is it was a trend a few years ago for guys to buy and then want to return a Strat. And not all the parts are necessarily still the parts that were sent with it. Now, I've never had that problem personally, but I photograph everything before I ship it. And, there are guys who will buy something, take what they need and send it back to you. It's dangerous it's dangerous out there.
Yeah, for guys like me who collect vintage, I only go to people I trust, people I've known for years and years and years, and I know that if there's ever an issue, it's resolved and it's always in my favor, and nobody's, you know what I mean? Nobody's, if you're a trustworthy person, they don't, they know that they're not working for that deal. They're working for the next deal. They want you to keep buying from them, and that's true.
Sure.
So now that one of the things, like when you look up your ads and you look up, you always have an ad in vintage guitar in the price guide and stuff. When we think of Timm Kummer, we always think of the resonator guitars because that's your kind of like your lifelong obsession, wasn't it?
Well, I like them. It's always been a category that's very misunderstood by most dealers. I go to shows and very few dealers know enough about them to even have them set up properly.
Right.
So for a very long time, I was able to buy from other dealers, friendly dealers that I've done business with. They're really soft right now, but, I like them. I tend to buy things that I like.
Mm-hmm.
I liked 59 Les Pauls, so I bought those.
Right.
I bought Strats and Tellys, which leads us to the other sort of things that, we were talking earlier about how when things trend, their prices can go up, but then interest can wane and, Travis Bean comes to mind. There was a time a few years ago where Travis Beans were trading for really big money, and nobody even talks about them anymore.
There's still like there's a book price for it. People aren't getting that book price anymore.
No, God, no.
And
I remember when Bill was running the price guide during the last bubble, and he called me to say, look, I'm raising prices on juniors and this and that. I said, why are you doing this? He said, well, I'm getting pressure from the dealers who sell them for a lot of money that, I said, but this is a click, this is a beat in time. It's going to go back. Mm-hmm. Which it did. And I guess the price guide did bring them back down a few years later when, everyone was sort of belly aching that they were priced too high and they couldn't buy them. Yeah. I don't know.
Now,
I mean,
the resonators.
A melody maker, I saw melody makers for $3,000.
Yeah.
It's like, that's crazy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because that's a $2,500 guitar. It'll probably always be a $2,500 guitar, but people will ask the sun and moon for them because they're 65.
Because they don't have any history with it, and they want to believe. Well, it used to be that I get phone calls from people out in the middle of the country and say, I've got a Les Paul Jr. Let's just beat up on that one more time. And it's like, well, I sell them for $550. Well, mine's better than yours. Well, that's fine. Like, what can I tell you? Everyone who finds something in the wild, or at least in the old days, mm-hmm. I'm not quite sure anymore, used to think that theirs is worth more because they're not looking at the condition. Condition is one of those things that can really make a big difference in price.
Yeah.
I mean, a perfect 59 double cut junior is made, with, lightweight. Let's call it everything's right on it. Might be a $9,500 guitar. But if it's got lacquer checking, it had tuners on and off, maybe a badass bridge on it, nothing routed, nothing extreme. But that guitar is probably $6,000, maybe $6,500. But people are still asking $8,000 and $10,000 for those. They're just not in that condition.
Right.
Condition's paramount in these things.
Yeah.
And it's going to get more because as the boomers age out, will the new guys in the market really have the same desire for those models? They didn't grow up on Leslie West. Mm-hmm. They didn't, grow up on Ariel Bender, or Mick Ralph. So what will they desire? They'll always desire a 59 Les Paul. Everyone's desired it since 1960.
Right, yeah. And a Stratocaster for some reason. The thing with the Stratocasters, too, is there's such it used to be the difference between high and low price was pretty narrow. Now it's pretty wide and could be almost double the price for a immaculate versus the player, just the sell-through one, that's got everything's okay on it, but it's a 80-year-old, 60-year-old Stratocaster, and that's, to me, it's like I'm finding more and more where people do pay the high price for the immaculate, especially if it's custom colored, but 90% of the ones we find in the marketplace today, they're player grade. They are.
They're totally, you're absolutely correct. And Player grade. I mean, what's a player make? When I was selling pre-CBS Strats in the beginning, they were $350 for a rose neck, $500 for a maple neck. A brand new Strat was like $279. They were, and they were terrible. I mean, without beating that dead horse, 3-bolt Stratocasters are the reason there is a vintage guitar business. 3-bolt Strats and pancake three-piece neck Les Pauls are the reason people started looking back and buying things, made from the previous period.
Right. So we owe those things.
Yeah.
We owe those guitars.
Oh, absolutely. And look, the guys who were nostalgic for 72 to 79 Strat, those guys are of a certain age. They're nostalgic for it, and there's nothing wrong with being in love with, it's like being in love with a 57 Chevy. It's of the time. And so, maybe that's what you desired in high school. But they're not great instruments. And someone asked me how long before my 73 Strat becomes vintage. And I generally say, well, in 1,000 years, it's not going to be vintage.
Yeah.
Time passing is not the measure for vintage. Vintage is the best materials, the best design, put together by the best craftsman or factory. Yeah. And so, 59 Les Paul was vintage the year after they stopped making it.
Yeah. Why is it that vintage, when we talk vintage, true vintage, 1965, what does that year mean to somebody who plays guitar?
Well, it's the effect the Beatles had. The Beatles come out in 64, and, well, at least in America. And all of a sudden, the guitar companies they go from making a few hundred guitars a month to making thousands. And so the wood supply which, now they're force drying wood. So 65, I don't know why that's the line in the sand, but it is. In Gibson's hive mind decided that, we have all these kids coming in from the Beatles. We got to cut the necks down to 1 9/16 so that these kids can handle them. Well, maybe if they did that to melody makers and juniors and to things of that nature, it would have been okay. They were doing it all the way up the line, including the Super 400.
Yeah.
I don't know what, teenage boy was playing an 18-inch archtop at the time.
There's so many things, like we always think of, Leo Fender sells to CBS. Gibson changes. They get rid of because they couldn't buy Rickenbacker.
CBS bought Fender, Rickenbacker. They couldn't buy Rickenbacker. But you know why? CBS was the Sullivan Show was on CBS. They watched the numbers from that Sunday night and said, we've got to get one of these companies. And when Hall wouldn't sell them the Rickenbacker stuff, they went to Leo.
Well, I remember Baldwin tried to get Leo first, and then something happened. But then, by that time, everything was right for him to step away. But, Ted McCarty, he's gone in 65, 66. They stopped double binding and Rickenbacker. But it's just, to me, it's always, anything between 1965. If you play a 63 Strat and you play a 66 Strat, you tell immediately there's differences.
Absolutely.
Everything
Absolutely.
is different. And
look,
the same thing.
From a 63 to a 65, even the small headstock 65 stuff doesn't feel the same as a 63. The values are starting to reflect that, by the way. It seems that there was a time when if it had a small headstock, an L series plate, it was kind of, priced sort of within the same math as a 63, the spaghetti logo and clay dots. But now they're not. I mean, clay dot, spaghetti logo, 63 or early 64 sells for considerably more than a pearl dot white guard transition logo Strat.
Yeah, I think they were pushing it because they were so hard to get that they were trying to say, hey, it's acceptable. That 65 with the white guard, you don't need a green guard.
Right.
It doesn't have the Fender backplate on yet, so it's okay. It doesn't. They didn't enlarge the headstock yet, so it's okay. It's still,
I know.
It's still
pre-CBS. L series right.
So that's to me. I think one of the things though. Let's go back to the resonators. Those things they don't change in value very often, do they?
Nope, they don't. They were a slow, steady thing. And look, there's a lot of really, really compromised, instruments out there. They were so limited in value for so long that they fell into the hands of bad repairmen or into the hands of people who didn't really understand them. And, unless it was an under the bed thing, you have decades where they really weren't, it wasn't until the 70s, at least in rock world. It wasn't until the 70s that people started to ask for them. Johnny Winter, and that was a big push. I started looking for them a little earlier, but not much earlier. And look, a Style 4 round neck tricone would be back then $600 in the 70s. Last one I sold for big money went for $40,000. But here's the thing: the one I sold for $40,000, at the same time, I had a couple others that were in the $20,000 range, and condition was the big difference. On them, condition makes even more of an impact. Custom colored Strats and Tellys, plated Nationals, Dons, Tricones. Those conditions paramount to the big value.
Yeah, I guess when you think of those old resonators, you think of how they were barrel housed and not dragged from gin joint to gin joint, thrown in the back of a truck, thrown in. You know what I mean? It was just
plenty of them didn't even have a case.
They had a rope.
The cases would quit in the first decade because they were super heavy relative to the case. The cases were made by the same companies that were making them for Martins and Gibson. And so when you put a guitar twice the weight in one of them, the handle and hinges would go pretty quickly. So a lot of them were thrown in the back seat of, cars and taking the gigs that way.
Now, when we think about the birth of the resonator, louder than a banjo, sweeter than a flat top, as they say. Which pre-28 tricone do you think is the loudest you've ever played?
Tricones are not as loud as single cones. Like a duolian is probably the louder of those two instruments.
The duolians come later, right?
It's not as focused a sound, but it's, that single cone is louder. The steel body and mahogany neck on the early duolians. That's, for me, that's the quintessential sound on that resonator. The tricones, they're sweeter. I mean, guys who play gypsy jazz can play on them. Guys who play pure jazz can play on them. They're not just a blues instrument.
Right. It's funny to think about how these were designed for the Hawaiian market, and they wound up reinventing, the whole genre, the traveling blues, where you could sing and be loud enough to be heard.
Well, actually, they come out of, the Dopiera brothers were out there doing repairs, and guys were coming in, and at the time, in the 20s, those big mandolin orchestras and banjos and all that other stuff, the guitar players before 28 had mostly gut-strung Martins and, maybe some steel string things, but they couldn't be heard over the mandolins, banjos. And so that they said, we'll make you something that'll be louder. And so that's where it comes from. But by the time they got it to market, the Rickenbacker, lap steel, like you said, Hawaiian music was quite popular. And so, they you don't see a lot of round neck tricones after 1935, although they made them up till 40, but a lot more square necks because the round necks were, being produced in other. You could buy an electric guitar by then.
Right. As far as the National versus Dobro split, like when the brothers leave National over money issues and stuff, and they form the Dobro company, is that where the single inverted cone comes from? They invented.
Yeah, they invented everything. But George Beecham, who was the general manager of the National company, stole their patents from them. At least that's their side of the story. I don't know. I'm not a lawyer, but I know that Orville Gibson was also taken advantage of because he was, an artist, not a businessman. Right. His company was also kind of finagled from him.
So I guess the golden era, the pre-war era ends because of the war. You can't. They basically all the metal that is stamped in America is going to airplanes.
Right, of course.
I guess after the war, there's like a folk blues revival, right? So you got the 1960s, Mike Seeger and some of these, I guess the original Dobro company is revived. You get National Resophonic comes in with some of these, Are those guitars made then better than the ones made in the 20s and 30s?
No. One of the problems with the Dobros made post-war Dobros, and I have one, and it's a nice guitar. It was actually built by Rudy Doviera, and I mean it's walnut. It's very high end. It was not made to sort of compete. The metal bodied stuff that became available in the late 60s and then 70s and beyond, and then Gibson bought it. They're really not. They're not comparable to an old National or Dobro. The Dobro, the National Resophonic Company makes a very good instrument, but they didn't use German silver. They on special order they'll make you a German silver tricone now. Yeah. But it's more money than I get for an original tricone, and the neck is mahogany, and a very important part on a tricone is the neck, and those were air-dried wood back in the day. They're no longer air-dried. They're also not the same scale. And a pre-war Dobro, pre-war tricone is slightly shorter scale than the new one.
Right.
The new one moves at the 12th fret. The old one's at 11 and a half.
There's like the bucket list for collectors. Like everybody to have a maple neck Stratocaster in their lineup. Everybody has to have the Rick 12 string. Right. To me, it's essential that you have a good resonator guitar because, where should somebody go to find a good resonant? Should they look for the 20s National Tricones? Should they go look for the Dobro Model 27? Should they go look for a National Style? What would be the one to get so that you had something that was always at least hold its value?
I think that, as far as tools, a 12-fret Duolian is probably the first one that I would recommend someone to look at and get if it's their first resonator. As far as the tricone stuff, look, a Style 1 tricone, whether you get the new one or get an old one, they're both fine instruments. It's more important you have a mechanic that can set it up because everyone's individual wants on something like that are different. I like them with a lower action, but I don't play bottleneck on it. So if you're going to play bottleneck on a round neck tricone, you want to have the action up slightly. Personally, it's easier to raise action than to lower it. So that's my advice. If you're looking at one someone has, if the action is low, don't worry, it can be raised. If the action is high, there may be a problem with the geometry, the neck, or just the neck set. A neck set can run you as much as what it costs to get a neck set on a Martin. So
the tricones are expensive, aren't they? Like the nice.
Well, they can be. A Style 1 is going to be $5,000 and up. I've sold them for over $10,000 for a plain Style 1, but that was again condition. Perfect one that you can shave in the reflection of. It's going to be $10,000-$12,000. A Style 2 is going to start at about $7,000 unless it's crappy, but that can be as much as $12,000 if it's really super clean and super early. If it's early enough to have the extra roses on the plate. That's another thing that I've sold Style 4s for multiples of a normal 4 because it had special engraving, and that doesn't mean someone's name. They use different engraving patterns on them.
Right. Now, as far as the Dobros, those are cheap, right? Those are affordable, like the old Model 27s.
Yeah, although most players that want Dobros are lap players. They want wood body, square necks. And the old ones like that can't compete with like Beard and some of the modern builders. They make a guitar that's much more usable for what guys who are out there making a living playing are using. An old one is nice, but it's not as efficient. That's why they're not big money. You can the walnut one I have is gold plated, engraved, and everything else. You could buy it for $5,000, so it's not expensive. But like you could easily spend that for a pretty plain Beard or any of the other sort of contemporary builders.
Right. I do have like a bucket list. I do want a nice resonator, you know, just so I can do like that old Rolling Stones, you know, Love in Vain, just to put it on a record. And but the truth is, every time I find one, there's just neck issues.
And that goes back to what I was saying earlier. It's because the dealers that get them don't know. You know, they don't know that, well, it's just going to be for slide anyway. No. When someone tells you a guitar is good for slide, it means that they've given up on trying to get the action where it needs to be to play comfortably.
It's a round neck slide guitar. So I want to point out, like, the new guide is out. 2026 guide is out. There is a typo. I was looking through it this morning, and I noticed an egregious typo. Because what I did is whenever the market tops, I took this opportunity, because what are you going to do? Say, oh, everything's down 10%, 20%. I took this opportunity to tell people, well, you know what? If you think of this as an investment, there's an annual return rate you get from everything. Put together in the book, in that guidebook, I put together what I consider the guitars that had the best return rates. There's a type. I also gave you the return rates, annual returns of basic, you know, well-collected models. And for some reason, it says that in the table, it says a 1944 to 45 non-scallop brace D18 has a 10-year annualized return of -6. That is absolutely incorrect. No guitar, vintage guitar out there has has that big of a negative return rate. It's supposed to be 6%, but I don't know why. It just, somebody clicked it. And the same thing with the 42 to 43 scallop braces was 7.6. So these Martin D18s, I mean, you're getting 6 to 7 to 8 to 10% back a year on them. They're good investments, believe me. But there was just a typo there, and I'm getting an email like, "Why is this -6? How can any?" I'm like, "Believe me, nothing is -6." But it,
well,
yeah. You know, people believe numbers. They believe them. They see them.
With numbers is that, you know, you got to proofread that shit for like crazy.
But anyways, the top 10 that give you the best return, like if you were an investor and you went back 10 years to get the best annual return rate of something, the EDS 1275 beats everything, especially the late 50s hollow bodies. You get 20% a year from those guys.
Well, is that based on real sales?
Yes. The last 10 years, only because there's so few of them, you know, what you paid 10 years for and what you pay now is a head and shoulders. Everything sells 100,000, whereas 10 years ago, they were not, you know, they were.
No, they weren't. They were probably 25
now,
or 30,000.
the second best return you're going to get is on model 1993 Rose Morris. That stuff is almost 20%, 16 to 17% a year, but that's only because 10 years ago, they were pretty cheap. Now they aren't. Right. Common Color Jazz Masters. Those have return rates about 15% a year, 14% a year. Flying V's from the 60s have great return rates only because they were cheap. Now they're expensive. Now they're kind of holding. Broadcasters, of course, 1950 anything Blackguard has great return. Everybody loves them Blackguards, but if you get a broadcaster, it's got a 12, 13% return a year. Bigsby's Destroy. Here's a good one. That lawsuit era model 2459 Destroyers. People are asking a lot for them, but people are getting a lot for them too. They weren't. But here's one that kind of blew me away was the Bison. You know, the Bison. Yeah, Burns Bison gets pretty good return only because it was very cheap, and now it's not. It's like a $3,000, $4,000 guitar. That's in the book there. But somebody asked me, well, you can put all the good ones in there. What are the worst returns? Like, what guitar did you buy 10 years ago that you lost your shirt on? Do you want me to give you a couple?
Sure, of course.
Okay, so I don't know why, but for some reason, Gretsch 6121s.
Agreed.
If it doesn't have a G brand.
But Gretsch is in general. The whole fucking
you're losing 4% a year on that Gretsch 6121. If for some reason Rickenbacker 370 12 strings you lose money on, 335s, you know, from the 70s you lose money on only because they were, you know, they don't go up the way the 60s go up. Gretsch Roundups, same thing. People love them. They like to hang them on the wall. Guess what? You're going to lose money on the thing. For some reason, this is kind of puzzling to me. Is the Epiphone Sheraton? Not sure why that's losing money because I know people still like them.
Well, I see people asking the moon for them. There was one in Dallas, and John's always very current on the market. Of course, this was a 59, which is you know, unusual, but you know, 20 high 20s. For some reason that, you know, what you paid for them now is kind of what you paid more for them earlier. Here's what's weird is the Iceman PS10 Black. You know, the Ibanez Icemans, and I don't know why, but that one's you're losing money on that one.
Anyway, K's, you lose
Well,
the Jimmy Reed, which I love. Even though it's got that big fat neck, those old Jimmy Reed, you lose money on that.
Yeah.
People aren't going to give you what you pay for them. But, here's one that's really kind of threw me for a loop. Kramer Berettas, you lose money on them. You lose 2% a year on those things.
Well, those were never good guitars. We could talk a lot about Kramer. Kramer doesn't make any sense. They were not real good. They're still not real good. Time is not going to make a Beretta a good guitar.
I know there's some with graphics that have the cool Eddie Van Halen graphic that you want. Those are go for money, but the Beretta in general. There are a lot of people that will argue with you on this. That National Glenwood 99, okay? The Glenwood 99.
What? Oh, they're dead in the water.
Ask somebody, why would you pay?
They're not just the 99. I'll give you the whole proof on that because it's not that cut and dry. The 95 is the red one. It doesn't have a bridge pickup. Okay, mm-hmm. They're all the same map shape. 95, 98, and 99. The 98 is it's always white. It has 3 tail pieces that might be on it. The 99 is green. The 99, the green 99s, they're still over 10 grand. Now the white ones that were, they were 45 to 5 for a minute. They backed off. I think 35 is the new number. So yeah, you lost money on those. The red ones you lost money on. There were people asking $4 grand for them 10 years ago. Now you're hard pressed to get 25 out of them.
I always wanted the Seafoam green. It's just a cool looking thing. But, if I'm going to pay 10 grand for a guitar, I'd rather get like a Gretsch, 6120 or something.
Well, you might want to get a guitar that you can play. You know what I mean? It's like I've sold those. I've had probably a half a dozen of them over the 50 years I've been buying and selling guitars. Every one of them goes to a dealer. Yep. Every one of them, because they're the ones who know how rare they are. Mm-hmm. A player, a kid, even an adult is not going to buy one for that kind of money. Yeah. It's just not worth it. But if you're a dealer and you never see him, I'll give you, for instance, there was a dealer, and he came to me in Dallas at a show. He said, "Tim, what do you want on that Glenwood 99? I said, "That's $13,500. He goes, "Oh, okay," and he walks away. Mm-hmm. The next show, I see him, and his booth is full of all these Resoglass Nationals. I said, "Rick, what's up?" He says, "You know what? I was collecting these things for years, and I was looking for that green one. And when I went in your booth and you told me the price and I didn't buy it, I knew that it was time to get rid of the whole collection." Mm-hmm. Because, I was no longer a collector. He's a very astute dealer. He's been in the business for a very long time, but that was a signal to him that, I'm not a collector.
Another one that I have up here on my lose money list is the Mosrite Ventures from the late 60s, that you lose money on those. I don't know why.
Well, they're unplayable. I mean, all of these things that you're talking about.
I try to be nice.
Are guitars when I was a Guitar Trader, a guy would bring that stuff in like a Duojet had to be a 56.7 with clouds and black. That was the only one we would buy, and only because that was the one Harrison used. The other ones I wouldn't give you $100 for back then. Now, 6120s, I always bought 6120s. They were $300 retail, and they were good guitars. But, now it has to be early Cactus and Cattle, pre-56, or 59, just like Brian's. Otherwise, the 60, 61s, the bodies get a little thinner. Nobody wants it. The stuff in between, like with the clouds and humps and G-brand, nobody wants it. They want the full Western regalia. Yeah. So that hasn't changed. Mm-hmm. And Mosrites, there are Mosrites that are sellable for a lot of money still. But the very earliest ones, with the Vibramute tailpiece and, certain features. And by the way, back in the old days, those were the ones that would be $500, $600. Mm-hmm. The other stuff I wouldn't even buy. I saw a guy walking around the Philly show last weekend, and he had a Gretsch bayonet, and that's a 7-string guitar. And back in the 70s and 80s, I would buy everyone that would come to the door because no one was making a 7-string guitar like that.
Mm-hmm.
And so there was a clientele for it.
Yeah.
Now that guy walked around, no one even asked him about it.
So today, like as we wrap this up, what would you tell somebody? You got a couple grand, you want a vintage guitar. Here's one that you will not lose money on.
In this market, a couple of grand ain't going to buy you anything. It's not going to lose value.
Yeah.
You need to, like, to me, what can you buy for $2,000 in the vintage guitar world? I don't know. I mean, I certainly would hope that someone buying a $2,000 Beretta would know better.
Yeah. Or the Dan Electro.
There are no guarantees like that.
Yeah.
Now, if you want to talk about big boy purchases and what's safe there, it's very different. I wouldn't be advising anyone to buy a 345 for $35,000, but certainly if they drop down into the high teens or low 20s again,
where they're supposed to be,
that's a buy.
Yep. Yep.
That's why I say value has to line up with price before these things change. And as long as you got guys asking over $200,000 for a broadcaster, that's thin air.
No,
I wouldn't advise that.
But what about Telecasters in general?
Generally,
if you could get a good Telecaster, 50s Telecaster, and you get it for a good price.
Absolutely.
Always, right? Always.
If you're gonna play it, you really want a 59 to 66 rosewood board telly, because you're going to play it. If you play a maple neck, you're going to degrade the instrument unless unless it's already played out.
Right. Or that's the sound you're going for, that bright. But
you don't see rosewood neck Telecasters from that period, from the pre-CBS period much, because people like them.
Right.
Because people are keeping them. It's not because they're all that bloody rare. They're probably rarer than Strats in the same period. There's enough out there, just that people don't want to sell them. They think they're worth more than what a dealer is willing to pay them for it. Again, there's where value and price have to, kind of get together.
Yep, definitely.
A Sunburst Les Paul, a really flaming one. I have offered on behalf of customers $1 million for them, and guys turn it down. And these are not fly-by-night guys. These are guys who've been buying bursts from me since they were $3,000. And for them, a lot of the guy who I last offered $1 million to for it is not he's wealthy enough, but he's not so wealthy that $1 million wouldn't have changed his day, but he still would rather have the guitar. Yep. So there, the value is greater than that price.
That's good. So I think today, this is a market that is down,
absolutely, it's soft as can be.
And I tell everybody, get that. The guidebook was we told you first. We knew it. Like I say, I look at everything. I look at what the return rate is on all of our favorites. And just so you know, like the Stratocaster is not your best return. What you pay for a really nice Stratocaster now is what you paid around that same level. It was always expensive. But there are a lot of things that were cheap that are expensive now. But look for them. They might come down and you get them again,
Certainly, custom colored Stratocasters are they're trending, as well as Blackguard tellies. But I see too much inventory, and I see crazy prices on the Blackguard. So why aren't we talking about V's and Explorers?
Is there an inventory of Blackguards out there? Because everybody's always emailing me, who's got Blackguards? Who's got Blackguards? And I only know of like 4.
Well, I think Dave Davidson up at...
well, yeah, he has a whole shelf of them, yeah.
Wellstrong has a wall full.
Yeah.
I think that Drew out in Tulsa has a bunch. He's bought a few at the last couple of shows. He's bullish on them. I'm sure Gary Dick has a few. They're out there. It's just here's the thing: you can get a good telly for far less than those prices. I remember in the bubble in 2005 or whatever it was, people were paying $65,000 for Blackguards, and then in 2009 they were 30. We're half the money. Now, does that reflect the future? It kind of does. Again, as the boomers age out, how many younger guys are going to have the same strong feelings about a Blackguard telly? or about a custom colored Strat. I don't know.
Oh, by the way, I was hanging out with Kim Shaheen and Robbie Lawrence yesterday, and I told them I was going to be chatting with you today, and they both send their best, and they told they told me to say hi to you.
Great guys, man. Yeah, they've got that first Stratocaster together.
Yeah, he got it. We got the neck for it. He's got the neck for it. It's all together. One of the things they were telling me about one of the Dallas shows where Dave DeForest showed up in a limousine.
Oh yeah. Yeah, Dave, yep. I was back running the shop. He had a limousine parked in front of the front door.
He would show, he would park in the front of the door.
And everyone who walked it.
Yeah, so those guys send their best, and I'll probably call them. But anyways, Thank you so much. This was a lot of fun, and I always, we talk all the time, and I finally got you on a podcast here, and so
it was fun.
Yeah, and I'll hit you up again next month for info as I do every month.
Yeah.
And I think, do you think that this market is going to be soft for a long time, or do you think it's going to just kind of?
No, I think that there's going to be an adjustment where people, legitimate dealers, we have bills that we have to pay. If we're not moving stuff, then, we're not in business. So it's got to change. Whatever the new reality is, we'll all learn to adapt to it. When I remember being in Nashville at a show, and Tom Whitrock, very famous burst collector, he walked in with a couple of his bursts and asked me to put them in my booth. And at the time, they were like $40,000 or something. I hope they go down. I would love to have more of them. If they got back down to $6,000, I'd buy more of them. And he's right. I mean, the same with me. I'm in business. If I can buy it and make money with it, that's what I do. I'm a merchant. Whatever wrongly you want. If someone came in and wanted, a Ventures model, I would probably advise them against it. But, if they insisted, I'd try and find them.
Do you think a 59 Les Paul with nice, everything's right and it's got great color will ever be $1 million guitar?
It already is.
So it is. Okay.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. It's already, that's why I say a fella that has one, famous collector, turned down $1 million from me on behalf of a very, very wealthy client. And so to me, that's, it is $1 million guitar. But there's an awful lot of them that shouldn't be 200,000. And again, this is conditioned, modified, this or that. There are factors. That same guitar with a headstock break would be hard to sell for 400,000. So,
well, I'm going to get that burst someday.
Well, I hope I'm the one who gets it for you, and I hope I can sell it to you for $12,000.
Yeah, because my wife. But the only thing is, my wife would beat me over the head with it. I've already been told that.
Now you just have to save. You have to save up $25,000. You buy the $12,000 burst, and you buy her a ring for $12,000.
But honey, it's worth this much. I don't know how many times she hears it. Well, anyways, Tim, this was so much fun, and I'll talk to you later. Thank you again. And, all right, so we'll talk later.
Cool, man. Thanks, man. Have a great weekend. Cheers.
Thank you for listening to Buy That Guitar, presented by Vintage Guitar Magazine. Please support VG for all they do for guitar players like us. Please subscribe, like, share, and comment on this podcast. I'd love to hear from you at ram@vintageguitar.com. See you again next week. Bye-bye.
The official Vintage Guitar Magazine price guide has partnered with 33 of the top guitar dealers in the industry to provide the most accurate values for thousands of models. This includes electric guitars, acoustic guitars, basses, amplifiers, effects, mandolins, and banjos. Whether your instrument is an investment or simply a piece you enjoy playing, it's always helpful to know what it's worth. If you're checking out a guitar at your local shop and want to know its value before making the purchase, this guide is your go-to source for all the details. Available in both print and digital editions, you can have the guide right at your fingertips no matter where you go.